Hello, I'm Ron Rollins and this is my video making the Dutch hood. The purpose of this video is educational and it will help you the better understanding of how and what goes into making a Dutch hood. I will take you step by step from materials to tools, and through this video you will succeed in making a proper fitting Dutch hood. As you can see, the hood fits firmly around the bird's face, below the chin, it drops down below the nape of the neck in the back. The bird will wear this hood comfortably to and from the field, and it is probably the most important piece of falconry equipment that a falconer has. I hope this video helps you with a better understanding of what goes into making a quality Dutch hood. Thank you. There's a wide variety of tools that are used in making a Dutch hood or any hood, and I will try and go through these and explain each one as needed. You will need, of course, an X-Acto knife. Several X-Acto knives are always good to have around. Size 11. I use a variety of X-Acto chisel blades for punching holes, slits in your braces, in the tops of your hood and they come in different sizes. These have all been ground down to various widths. You need a small 6-inch or 15mm metric ruler. This is used for presetting and measuring slits and other implements that we're going to use. This is an architectural compass. It has 2 small pointers. This is used for your prescribed lines that you will be using for pre-punching your holes when you get to that stage of making the hood. You can buy these at a blueprint shop. This is a pattern tracing wheel that you can buy at a fabric shop. It has teeth on it that are approximately 1/8 of an inch apart. When you run it out, this is what you use for marking your pre-punched holes. We have a number of needles that are used for pre-punching your holes. These are dental picks. They make good hole punchers if they are filed down or sanded down. The one I particularly use is handmade, and you can notice the curvature of it. It just helps go through the material and come out where you want it to time after time. Or you can use a straight needle. This is actually a similar dental pick that has been cut off and then sharpened to a fine point. You will need a small pair of needle nose pliers. These happen to have a curved tip on them. They're more comfortable when you are working with the needle and holding them in your hand, such as I am here. You will need 1 or 2 small pair of scissors. These are used for clipping off your thread ends. These are surgical scissors. They have a little notch in them so you can clip your thread off real close. These are surgical clamps. They are 5-inch with a curved snout on them. These are a must for doing Turks knots and braces. Next we have one of the most important tools. This is a lacing fid. It is used for enlarging holes in your braces. It is a must for doing a Turks knot. As you can notice on this one here, I have bent the tip about 1/4 of an inch from the tip. This allows you to get underneath your stitches if you are tightening stitches. It helps you get underneath the laces when you are doing your Turks knot. This is the most important tool there is. Next we have a scribe. This is what you will use to scribe your pattern to the leather before you cut it. Then we have what they call a craft aid. They come in different little shapes. These are used for modeling after you have completed your hood. It is drying on the block. This is an excellent little tool for getting out wrinkles, getting down into tight areas that you want to polish out. We have a cake of beeswax. This is very important that when you are waxing your thread, through the course of the film, you will notice I will wax the thread continuously. This helps strengthen the thread and gives it the bite that is needed to hold the stitches. This is a spool of beading thread, size D. It's very strong. It's somewhat similar to dental floss, but it's not as fibrous. And once it is waxed, it is very structurally sound material to work with, and it doesn't fray if you keep it waxed. The needles I will use are quilting needles, size 7. These are stout little needles. When you're working with them, the head is the same diameter as the shank of the needle. You never want to grab a needle by the eye. Hold it always by the shank. This is a plexiglass dowel. This is what I use to rub the hood out after it is dried or in the drying process. This is what gives you the burnish, or what gives the burnish that I create on my hoods. And you can get this at a plexiglass or plastics fabrication shop. It's a 1/2 inch dowel. You can get them in 3/8 and 1/4 inch dowels. These are finishing tools. This is a wallpaper seam roller. This is what I use to roll the seam of the hood when it is wet and inverted and put on the mold. This gives you a nice smooth seam. This is a strap cutter. This is used for basically just cutting brace material and other falconry related materials. You can adjust this to cut different thicknesses, and it's much easier than using the old method of a straight edge, which is a ruler that you can always use with your X-Acto knife for cutting braces and neck materials. And I also use a quality pair of, these are ginger cutting shears. These are leather shears. They're probably the best. But some of these materials or some of these tools aren't necessary. They're just things that you can add to the list of tools. And last but not least is a good quality hole punch. You want to be precise when punching holes in your braces or any other related materials when the need arises. Next, I would like to talk a little bit about the molds that we will be using, so we will go into that. The hood molds, or blocks as they are called, are the most important other piece of equipment that is needed in making a hood, in that it is what the hood gets its shape from. These molds have been made, hand sculptured over a period of years. I have developed these, and my patterns fit these molds. This is how you get the shape and the contoured fit that my hoods have developed. You cannot make, this is how the hood is molded onto it. It's wet. This is in the drying stage of a hood that is being made. The mold has to be precise in its shape to fit the pattern, as well as how the hood will fit the falcon or hawk's head when it is made. These particular molds are made of Bondo, auto body Bondo. This happens to be a Merlin mold here, but you can see how they are shaped and contoured to fit, or to, in appearance, look like a falcon's head. Here is another hood that is being made. This just dried. I am proceeding to put a top on it, cut the beak hole, and this will be finished tomorrow. But you can see how the hood fits on the mold, and it dries. It takes that shape. That's how the Dutch hood gets its name, because it is molded to a particular shape. Now that we have covered all the tools, hopefully we have prepared you for making a Dutch hood. Let's go to work. To begin with, we must find a suitable leather. What we have here is an extra heavyweight kangaroo hide. Its thickness is approximately 1.2 millimeters. This is what most hood makers have gone to because of its availability. It's very lightweight and very tough, making an excellent hood. This is a tooling calf hide, 3/4 ounce in weight. This material is hard to find nowadays. The leather manufacturer doesn't have a market for it anymore. It is an excellent hood making material, and I prefer it over the kangaroo because of its smooth finish. If you can find it, use it. This is a trimmed whole English kip hide, 2/3 ounce in weight. You can see I have two straight edges where I have trimmed it off with the strip cutter for making braces. This is an excellent choice for both making hoods and brace material because of its stiffness and durability. But again, these hides are hard to find because of the manufacturer. This is a piece of lightweight kangaroo. Its thickness is about 0.7 millimeters thick. It is what I use for the neck piece or piping around the base of the hood. This section is on the setting and laying out of patterns and cutting a hide for minimal waste. Our choice is to use a kangaroo hide. You don't want to have to work with the whole hide, so if you use this chart in laying out your patterns and cut your hide off at the line at the base of the pattern shown in the diagram. The main part of the skin we use is down the middle of the back. You can use as much of the material as desired. This is the neck and this is the rump. You want to cut your patterns this way because the strength of the leather runs down the middle of the back and becomes soft going towards the belly. You want to stitch your hood using the strength of the material. Now that we have selected our leather and a pattern, we will use our scribe to scribe the pattern onto the leather material. You want to press firmly down with your scribe as you are going around the pattern, and as well you want to have a firm grip on your pattern. Trace around all the outside lines in the beak hole, down the tail until you have completed the centerpiece pattern. You want to scribe down all the way around your pattern. This does make a mark. You're on dry leather. You want to make sure you get all of the vital areas to be marked. Don't forget to mark your slits for the top of your hood where your turks knot's going to be going through. Next, you will want to position your eyepiece pattern and trace around it, again firmly holding on to the pattern so it doesn't move. Then flip the pattern over, position it next to your center pattern, and make your opposite eye pattern. Next, you'll take your X-Acto, starting at the top of your tail of your center pattern, bring your X-Acto towards you as you cut along the scribed lines of your pattern. You always want to cut towards you. I cut the sides of the center pattern at a slight angle inward. I'll cut the bottom of the pattern at a straight angle. Turning your leather, this allows you to cut down in the fork of the tail or the back of the hood pattern. Again, pulling your X-Acto towards you. The pressure on the X-Acto is moderate. You don't take or you don't need a lot of pressure to cut through the material. I use my little finger, as you notice, to steady my hand as I am pulling the X-Acto towards me, cutting the material. You should always be careful when you're cutting out corners as not to cut into the material. There's a center piece cut out. Next, you will be cutting out your eyepiece. Cut the bottom with a straight cut. As you start down in the corner, coming up the face, you will want to cut at a slight inward angle. This helps the material come together later when you are stitching it to make the hood. This helps it fit the contour shape of the mold. You want to be precise when you're cutting. It's important that these pieces be cut exactly to the pattern. You have cut out one eye panel. Here what we are doing is pre-cutting the beak hole, and you are very lightly going through the surface of the material. You don't want to cut all the way through. This is just to help you out when in the finishing stages of the hood, after it is dyed and blocked. It's easier to finish the hood by having it pre-cut and measured to where it fits on the face. You will also want to pre-cut the slits in the top of the hood where your Turks knot will go. Then you will need to cut out your other eye panel, and we can go on to the next step. Next, you will want to cut a thin piece of kangaroo for your neck strap. Cut this approximately 7 inches in length. Here I use the X-Acto chisel blade. This neck piece is the piece that you will be attaching to the bottom of your hood. As you can see here on the bottom of the hood, the neck piece sewn on after it has been dyed and glued and then stitched into the hood. Next, you will want to cut 2 pieces of 3/16 inch calf lace. You can buy most of this material at your local leather store. This is what we make the Turks knots out of. And this will be the last pieces we need before we go on to dyeing. You want to make sure you have all your pieces cut and ready to dye before we go on to the next step. Here we have all the pieces needed to dye and ready to continue. Next, we will want to dye the pieces of the hood. In this case, we're going to dye the centerpiece brown and the eye panels blue, and we will be using the dunk dye method using a vat of Phoebing's dye. The idea here is that kangaroo is so porous that it doesn't matter if you dye it on the one side, it seeps through, so it's best just to saturate the leather. Let it drip dry and then place it on a paper towel or a clean towel, whatever you prefer. Next, you will want to dye your chin strap and one piece of the lace you cut for your Turks knot, so you have coordinating colors when the hood is finished. These should be dipped in for about 20 seconds is all that is necessary to get a nice even dye. One of the purposes I do this is to eliminate any streaking in the dye. Next, you will want to clean off your clamps because we will be changing the color of the dye. Then you will want to dye your eye panels. We are going to be dyeing a blue, a royal blue. This dye is a alcohol-based dye, a Tandy Leather Company dye. Again, you just let it sit 15 seconds. Get the excess off and lay it out on the paper towel. You want to be careful when you hold these with your clamps. It will leave some indentations. So what I advise is to place the clamps where the braces will go. It won't be as noticeable if there's any markings left on the hood. You always want to be careful when you're dyeing leather. It has a tendency of getting on pieces of material that's unnecessary. Then you will want to dye the last piece of lace for your Turks knot. Then lay it out on the paper towel and let all the pieces dry. This section is scribing and marking for your pre-punched holes. Your material should be damp. Do this directly after you have dyed your material or dampen it with a spray bottle. Using your compass, set your gauge at 4 millimeters. Draw your scribe lines down the side, across the bottom, and up the other side of your centerpiece. These markings are the depth in which you will pre-punch your holes from. Next, scribe your eye patches in the same manner, pulling your compass towards you. Mark both eye patches as shown. Then you will want to use your tracing wheel. Start down in the corner of your eye panel. And following your scribed line, roll your tracing wheel up and around your eye panel. With your finger, roll your eye patch around to follow the tracing wheel. We will only be using this on the eye panels and the base of the centerpiece. These are your marks where your pre-punched holes will be. The only reason we mark the bottom of the centerpiece is this is where you will stitch your neck piece on. This is a needle for your pre-punched holes for lacing. This is the tool I use. Align the two pieces, your eye patch and your centerpiece, directly in line at the base, using the bottom scribe line. Using the back of your hole punch needle, you will scribe these lines parallel with one another, coming across from your centerpiece to the dots that were made from your tracing wheel. Now you will be rotating your eye panel along the edge of your centerpiece. As you move it, where the material comes together gives you the point of where you want to scribe your line from the centerpiece to the eyepiece. As you work up around the eyepiece, these lines will become more open on the centerpiece. That is why you don't pre-mark any holes on your centerpiece. As you roll it around and you start working down the back side, these will become more parallel again. You want to be firm with holding these pieces together so you have a perfect alignment and you end up with an even hood. When you end up at the base, you will end up with a line directly across from your bottom scribe line on your eye panel. Next, we will start punching your pre-punched holes. Using the pre-punched needle, stick it in the marked hole and follow the guideline. This line tells you in which direction to push your needle. You want a firm surface to work on. I use my left index finger. Slide your needle to where it comes out about 3/4 of the way through the thickness of the material, or just under the outer surface. You don't want to break that outer surface. Then use your marks that you have made. That's what they're there for, as guidelines. This takes a lot of practice, but let the needle do the work. If you just poke it in and push, it should come out the same depth time after time. And that's what's important. You want the same depth of these holes. Then just follow your guidelines around and punch each and every hole. Occasionally you'll want to dip your needle in wax. This helps you slide your needle through the material easier. Starting in the corner of your centerpiece at the base, you want to punch your hole slightly inward toward the edge. This gives you a better stitch when you go to sew your neck piece on. Then, following the contour of the base of the neck, go ahead and use the marks and punch your holes. This is where you'll sew your neck piece or piping on. Notice how I'm working the leather with my fingers as I'm punching the holes. This is a straight needle as compared to the curved needle that I used. It is actually a dental pick. This is also used for hole punching. The other needle, with the straight shaft, is a little harder to work with. That's why I cut it off at the base and I put it in this little handle. It's much easier to work with. Here we are pre-punching the holes in the bottom of the eye panel for your neck piece. You want to punch that first hole inward toward where it joins the centerpiece. Following the contour of the base of the eyepiece, poking in and pushing straight out, following that bend. You're following your guidelines and pushing all the way across the base of the neck piece. You want to follow your guidelines and being consistent with punching your holes. Here it shows a consistency of the holes punched in the centerpiece. This is how your two pieces should line up with your guidelines and your holes punched. You'll notice at the top of the hood where they open up and become wider, but they're consistent all the way around and down the back. Next we have the needles in a cake of wax and beading thread that we'll be using. These needles are a size 7 quilting needle. I like these needles because they're stout and the head is the same diameter as the shaft. This is a spool of beading thread, size D. This is what we use. You can get it at Tandy Leather or a craft house. Here we are rolling off about 5 feet of thread that is needed for sewing on one eye panel. Next we'll roll off another length, a little longer, to set aside for when we go to sew on the neck piece or piping. Next we will want to wax the thread. Take your cake of beeswax and you pull the thread between your thumb and the side of the cake of wax. You will rotate it. You're just putting on a good coat of wax. This helps preserve and strengthen the material in that it won't fray when you are pulling it through the leather time and time again. You need to get a good coat of wax on it. We will be waxing it continuously throughout the making of the hood. Next you will want to thread up a needle, giving yourself a little excess. Then grabbing the needle by the shank with your needle nose pliers, you'll insert it to the very bottom first hole in the right eye panel, slide it through like so, then take your centerpiece and slide it on to the needle, joining the two pieces together. Slide your needle on through until you have a little excess of about an inch or so. Then I wrap that little excess up underneath my thumb and snug up the two pieces, and then run your needle back through those two first set of holes. This will give you a secured starting spot. Next you want to go to the second pair of holes and slide it through. Once and then a second time, pulling it snug each time you pull it through. This is how it should look. Then you want to take your clamps and pull it tight. It's not supposed to do that, but pull it tight. What we're going to do here is back up and tie off to that little excess thread. Leave your clamp on there. Now you want to bring your main thread around and underneath that excess thread, and then take your needle and go underneath that very first stitch as shown here. Pull it up to where you have just a small loop that encircles all of these threads. Then take your needle, go through that loop and back through that first set of holes. This will be fairly tight, so you'll have to slide it through using your needle nose. When you're halfway through, pull your main thread tight down around the shank. This will give you a nice tight knot that'll hide up inside the leather once it's pulled through. After you've tied your knot and clipped off your excess, you can continue by going back through the second set of holes once again. This is going to be snug and probably take off some excess wax off your thread. This is always a good time to maybe re-wax. Now going to the third set of holes, you want to work the edges of the kangaroo as you're working. Go through this third set of holes. You're going to go through each set of holes twice. This is called a double loop stitch. You'll be going through each and every set of holes twice throughout this procedure. This gives you a nice tight seam. You can tighten these up fairly snug. Always check your work as you're going along, especially after you have started. This is how your seam should look. It's not buckled, it's just nice and tight. Then continue lacing, following your guidelines. And continue lacing, pulling your stitches tight every time you go through a set of holes. Down in this portion of the hood, your lacing is fairly close together. Your guidelines are just slightly less than parallel with one another. You can pull these tight to where you can watch the material almost buckle, and then hiding the thread underneath your left thumb, you can get an idea of how tight you can pull these. Generally, as you're stitching, the material lays over your left index finger, and there's a slight bend in the two materials. This makes your needle go through much easier. Then you just continue lacing up the front of the face. When you get to this point, your guidelines are going to start to separate somewhat, and you will start to guide your needle using those guidelines. Now that we're up on top of the eye panel, you'll notice that your guidelines may not come together exactly. And what you have to do here is pull your eye panel in the direction in which you are lacing. This will correct those guidelines coming together. And check your work. Make sure you don't penetrate that outer surface. This is also a good time to re-wax your thread. Here again you can notice the angle of which I hold the material. This helps a lot in guiding. You can actually see the needle going between the two pieces of material. You're going in two different directions, but as you pull it together, your guidelines will come together. If you follow these guidelines and these rules I have set down, you should not have any problems in lacing a hood together in 3 to 4 hours. This is the most difficult area because you have a tendency of not pulling your stitches tight enough. But this is where they bind the most. Working down the back of the hood, you'll notice your guidelines come together more evenly. You still have to pull occasionally to align your guidelines. And then just work down the back until we are at the base. Now that we've worked down to the last few stitches, we will prepare to tie this off. Going through the last stitch, the last couple stitches, you want to make sure that it's nice and even and straight. You'll notice the little excess of the tail that is left over. You don't want to trim this until we get finished with the rest of the hood. Now going through the last pair of holes, as a safety measure, you can go through these twice or even a third time to give it a nice tight finished seam. Then check your work before you finish tying your knot off. Now you want to take your needle and go back up to the next to the last cross stitch and go underneath it. Pull your needle and thread through. Then take your needle and go underneath that second main stitch. And this will give you a little loop that encircles all of these stitches. And then take your needle, go through that loop and back through that next to the last pair of holes, and then stop halfway through and pull your main thread tight. Then you can pull your needle through, and that gives you a nice knot that'll pull inside the material. And you can repeat this a second time. This just secures everything, and you know that it's not ever going to come apart. It's always best to have a little bit too much thread than not enough. You don't want to have to do this somewhere in the middle of your hood. Pull it tight. Then you can cut it off, and you have sewn on your first eye panel, and then repeat this to sew on your other eye panel. This is how it should look. Nice job. Now that we've sewn both eye panels on, you'll see in the back where I've trimmed it how it comes to a point. This is how your hood should look. You want to follow the contour of your eye panels when trimming this. Next, we'll want to glue the strap that we cut and dyed earlier for your neck piece or your piping material. Using Tandy's contact cement, use the narrow width of your brush. I cut small sections of poster board to do my gluing and some of my dyeing on. You want a nice even coat of glue on. This is one of the exciting parts of making a hood. This is showing you how to measure how much material you will need to go around the neck piece. And this will also give you a little extra after it is sewn on, but this gives you a good measurement. Next, we will want to cut 2 strips of skiver leather. This is a very thin leather. Cut them approximately 6 millimeters wide. This is the material that we will glue to the inside of the hood that will cover the stitching. This prevents any light leakage after years of use. Put a nice even coat of glue, contact cement, on your skiver material. Just a good even coat will suffice. And you don't want to glue your material to the poster board that we're gluing it on, because when it sits, it will glue to it and set up on the poster board. So you just want to pick these up and set them in another spot so they don't glue to it. Then set these aside to dry. Next, you'll want to glue using the narrow edge of your brush, using the width of your stitching as guidelines, you want to apply a nice even coat to the stitched area of your hood. This isn't a must, this is just a precaution so you don't develop any light leakage in your hood. Next, you'll want to take your neck piece after it's set for 15 minutes or so and fold it over before you actually glue it together. This just helps it to work with it easier. Then you want to pinch it to glue it to itself, and then you can slide your fingers up along the sides. You want the two ends to come together as fairly close as you can, and this gives you your neck piece or piping. It gives it a stiffness, but it's a nice rounded finish neck piece when you get through with it. Then you'll want to take your roller and run across it so you know you've got a nice contact, and it gives you a nice flat finish to work with when you go to stitch this on the base of your hood. Next, take one of the pieces of skiver and trim it off at a slight angle. And starting at the base of the right eye panel, you want it just below the stitch line, and then pressing your thumb. This material is very light and flexible, and it bends very easy. As you pull it, using your thumb and your fingers, attach it to the glued area of the hood. Then trim it off just below the base of the scribe lines. Then take your thumbs and fingers and rub it in so you have a good contact. Next, we'll want to wax up another length of thread . Here we are marking the tail ends of the centerpiece for your pre-punched holes. Starting from the outside, I just run the tracing wheel inward. This will give you your hole marks for pre-punching. Then we'll take our pre-punched needle and again poke and push your needle out through the bottom and pre-punch your holes on the tail of your centerpiece. Now we'll want to sew on the neck piece. Sliding your needle up through the third hole from the end, slide your neck piece onto the needle. You'll want to come out about halfway through the width of your neck piece. This is important. You don't want to be less than halfway of the width of your neck piece. And go back up through it a second time. And this will anchor it for you to work from. Notice how I'm holding the neck piece with my thumb and left index finger. You want the back edge of your neck piece flush with the material of your hood. Then back up to the next to the last hole. You're going in a reverse mode here. You can feel the tip of that needle coming through if you are careful when you're pushing that needle up. And then again, you'll want to make each stitch snug. Then you go through that first hole, pushing it up through. You'll want to go through this at least twice, if not a third time. You can't go back through and tighten these up after you've gone through them, so you want to make sure they're nice and tight. Take your clamps and snug up this first set of stitches. Going through this a third time just secures the end of your neck piece. Then go back up through your second to the last set of holes. This will be tight. Pull it through. Then we can tie off this main thread. Clamp onto your excess piece, and then take your main thread and go across it and underneath it, and then underneath, take your needle underneath that first stitch. And this will give you a little loop. It'll look like a backward 6. Then take your needle and go through the loop and up through that first set of holes that you originally went through. Make sure everything's tight. Then you can pull your needle through and cut off your excess, and we'll be ready to go on to stitching up the rest of your neck piece. This is also a good time to re-wax your thread. Now you can start with your next hole and continue stitching your neck piece on. Now that you've crossed over your first intersection where your eyepiece and your centerpiece comes together, you want to go through that first set of holes and snug this up. Then take your hole punch, your needle punch, and open up that last set of holes that you laced through that connects your eyepiece with your centerpiece. Make sure you haven't gone through the outer surface. And then you'll want to lace through this. This gives you a crisscross pattern and it secures this intersection. Now, as you'll notice, when I pull this through a second time, loop it around so it goes over the end of that skiver that we attached earlier. This makes sure that it won't ever come through it. Then go through that stitch again and you're ready to go on and stitching the rest of your neck piece on. You always want to make sure that everything's nice and flush and keep that front edge rolled over with your index finger. Now we've stitched over to the second intersection where the eyepiece meets the centerpiece in the front. This is an important intersection. You want a nice clean fit down in that corner. Again, we take our needle punch and go through that first set of holes that we laced through. This secures that whole intersection. Making sure everything's tight, then we'll go back through. And be sure you get it around the end of that skiver material. And then follow up through that first stitch you made on the centerpiece again. And then you can continue stitching. Now that we've stitched all the way to the end, we can tie it off again, going underneath that next to the last cross stitch and then back underneath the main stitch. And this will give you a little loop. Going through the loop and up through that next to the last set of holes. And pull your main thread tight around the shank. And this gives you a nice knot at the end that pulls into the material. And you can repeat this a second time. Then you can go ahead and trim off the excess piping flush with the neck piece. And this gives you a nice finished job. This is the way it should look when you're finished. Next, you'll want to soak the hood either in lukewarm or cold water. Get it good and wet. Then you'll want to shake off your excess and dry off the excess. Next, you'll want to invert the hood. This is done by simply pushing through the face and pulling the tails over the front. Now it's ready for the mold. Take your thumbs and push out on your eye panels. You want to put this on just like you'd be putting it on a falcon's head. You want to just slide it on and make sure you get it on fairly straight, because this is what it'll take the shape of after it's dry. Check your seams, pull a little in the back, run your thumbs over your seams, to where it's on fairly secure. Next, you'll want to take your seam roller and roll over your seams. This just gives you a nice even seam, and it flattens out the material and gives it a nice even finish. Using your thumbs is good. This is how it sets before you dry it. Here we're going to use a blow dryer just to get the excess moisture out. I prefer letting them dry naturally. You take it off the mold and you can dry it inside. This is a good time to make your braces. You want to cut a strip of calf or kangaroo, approximately 12 inches in length each and 8 millimeters wide. You want to wet the ends that you're going to roll up to make your buttons. I use a spray bottle. Then you'll want to cut the opposite end. I used the X-Acto to cut. Notice there are two different angles. This lets me know which one I'll be attaching a centerpiece to later on. Then you will simply want to roll your end over. I usually roll it 5 times. This gives you a nice button, and with the material damp, it's easier to work with. Then take your hole punch, either your smallest or next to the smallest hole, and punch it in the center. Then using your fid, run up through that hole to enlarge it so it's easier to pull the rest of your material through. It should be fairly tight. Here we have a nice button. Now you'll want to punch, using your chisel blade, a slit in each brace approximately 3 millimeters from the button. This slit should be no longer than the width of the brace. Now this bottom piece, we will want to cut about a 4-inch piece of lace that we are going to glue to the inner surface of this lower brace. Take your fid and run it through the slit. This lets you know where it's at. Then you want to take your contact cement the best stuff is nice and runny and it's easier to work with. You don't get a lot of stringy strands. Then run a nice even coat of glue on the back side of this piece of lace that you cut. This is a filler. It fills the gap in the lace, in the brace, that goes through the back of your hood, that goes through the opposite brace where usually you'll have a problem with braces pulling feathers on birds. This eliminates that problem. Then you want to glue up into the pull tab area on both braces. This just gives you a nice stiff pull tab to work with. Let these dry. Then we want to glue that piece of lace to the underside of that bottom brace and roll it on so you get a nice good contact. Then you can take a chisel blade and trim off the excess and make it a nice tapered end so it'll slide through the slits in the hood and the brace when you are putting these in your hood. Next, you will want to fold over your pull tab area. This just gives you a nice stiff pull tab for your brace. Now that the hood is almost dry, we can start rubbing it out using the plastic plexiglass rod that I talked about earlier. This is really an exceptional tool because it's versatile. You can beat with it, you can roll with it. What we're doing here is beating out any lumps or bumps that may occur from drying. Because the slick finish and the roundness of the rod, it gives a nice burnish to the hood. Next, you can take the Craft Aid tool. This is an excellent little tool for getting down around the neck piece and those intersections that are sewn together. This makes a nice even joint between the hood material and the piping. And this can smooth out any little lumps or whatever. This is good for smoothing out the skiver material will come through, as so is your threads. Next we want to go you want to remember that the more you rub, the finer the finish you'll get on your hood. the smoother it will become. You can see the burnished look as I'm rubbing on this hood. The thing I like about this plastic rod is it allows you to get into those rounded areas where your seam comes together. If your hood seems to dry out a little before you get to an area, spray a little water on it. This is what brings it back to life. Then you can beat on it and rub out any rough spots. Here we've taken the craft aid tool or modeling tool and we're just flattening out the neck piece. Next we'll want to pre-cut our beak hole. We've already scribed a line in, but before we go on and finish rubbing out the hood, you want to just lightly go over this beak hole with your number 11 X-Acto. This will make it a lot easier when you go to cut it out on the finished product. And you want to be exact. An even pressure. I use my ring finger there to help me stabilize my hand. You're just cutting maybe a fourth or a third of the way through the material. You want to make sure not to extend your cut, stop and pull your blade out. Next you want to take your 9mm chisel blade and punch your front slit in the top of your hood for your turks knots, because they will be coming up next. Then you can punch your back hole, and then I use a smaller chisel blade, it's about a 5mm, and punch the center slit in the top of your hood. Next you can take the hood off of the mold and you want to use your fid and run it through the front and out the back two slits. And this is just opening up the slits to work with, and then take your fid and run it up through the middle slit. This just makes it a lot easier when you go to install your lacing for your turks knot. Take your two strips that we cut and dyed earlier. This is the lacing we're going to use for the turks knots. You want to dampen this material. It's got to be damp, not wet, just good and damp. Stretch it to where it's nice and straight. It's a lot easier to work with if it's a little damp. I use a spray bottle a lot when making a turks knot because the material needs to be damp. Now we want to start. Take your hood off and get your small pair of clamps and go up through the front slit in your hood. Taking the blue lace, we want to pull it down through, and you want the rough side showing up. Then go up through the back slit and pull it down through the back. You'll notice the rough side is facing out. That's so when we pull it up through, the finished side will be facing forward. Next you'll want to go up through the front of the hood again and do the same thing with the brown lace. This is what's nice about the curved medical clamps rather than straight ones. It makes it a lot easier to work with. This takes a little practice, so then pull it down through. You want your ends even so the knots will come out even, and it just makes it a lot easier to work with. Then you want to take your fid, run it back up through the middle of the hole, and separate those two pieces of lace. Now comes the trick. Take your clamps and go down through the middle of the hood, and you'll want to take the front blue lace grab a hold of it with your clamps and pull it up through the hood. Then go down through and pull your front brown lace and do the same. The purpose of this is it gives you a very solid foundation to work from, and you don't want a loose knot on top of your hood. Next, you'll want to go down through. Make sure these are tight. The tighter the better. You may want to run your fid up through the center again and open it up so you can reach down through your clamps to pull these laces up through. Then reach down, and these two laces will cross one another as they come up through the hood. Pull your blue one up through first, and then go down and pull your brown one up through. You'll pull the brown one over to the right and your blue one over to the left. Then set the hood back on the mold and pull these out so you'll have alternating colors in a cross pattern. There you can see it better. This is your basis to work from. To start the Turks knot, you'll want to take that right front brown lace and fold it back over the blue one. Then you take the blue, fold it over that brown lace, then take the back brown and fold it forward, and then taking the last blue over and underneath the two brown laces. This gives you your base knot. Now you want to go up through this with your clamps and open up the center of this, because we'll be pulling these up through. Now go down through, taking the left blue, pull it up and through. You're going around the blue and up and through. Then you'll notice on this brown one, we're working in a counterclockwise rotation, Go down, brown around the brown, and up and through. They always go around their counterpart. You go down next to the blue, blue around the blue, and up and through. Then this one is your center one. Go down, you're going around the brown. It's kind of a twist and pull when you pull these up through. And then you pull it up and through. So you've got a brown and blue forward and a brown and blue back. Now you'll want to tighten these using your fid, starting in the front in a counterclockwise rotation. You go underneath these and then pull them up tight. Under the brown, this loosens it. Open up your gate there, that blue one, and then pull it down and around and pull it up and tight. And you just keep following this around until you've made 2 revolutions. You notice with my thumb on my left hand, I pull. I'm trying to keep these laces down around the base when I'm pulling them through. This helps give you a nice tight knot when you're finished. This fit is excellent for this because it has nice point and rounded edges. If this material is not damp, when you go to pull these tight, it'll crack on you. Then you can see if you can slide that fit underneath one of these laces, it's still loose enough that it can be pulled tight. You may have to work at it from both angles and then rotate it just like a screwdriver and then pull it up tight. This is where I get my real tight little knots. Next, you want to take your plastic rod and set the hood on its side on the edge of the table, and you can beat on it, and this will give it the nice rounded burnished look. And this will also help show up any of the laces that might be loose that need to be tightened up. Again, the more you work on it, the nicer it will finish. Then you can see any little indifferences in the lace. You can go around and tighten these up as you would like. That gives you a nice round Turk's knot. Now pull your blue ones out and your brown ones forward, and this is the start of your next Turk's knot. After you've finished your second Turk's knot, you'll want to wet the laces coming out the top. You want to get them good and wet. Spray them with the spray bottle. Then you want to align them and set the hood back on the mold. Take a piece of excess thread and make a double loop knot. And this you can tie over the end of the 4 pieces of lace. And this will secure these together. And while these laces are wet, then you can form this in any fashion that you would like. And then you can go on and either dry it naturally or with a blow dryer. Next we'll want to punch the slits for the braces using the 9mm chisel blade. I place this C slit between the last 2 stitches. Then I'll place an 11mm chisel blade right next to the material that we glued into over the seam. This is your B slit. Turn the hood over and make these 2 slits on the opposite side. Using your 9mm chisel blade, punch your slit just inside the eye panel and then out to the outer edge. These 2 slits are basically the same size. The only one that is larger is the center slit, because this is where the material folds over itself. You can wet this area either with a drop of water from your spray bottle or a mist. It just helps this material become workable when installing these braces. Now you want to take your fid and run it through the A slit and out through the B slit. Just open these up so it's easier to work your braces through these. Again, coming from your C slit in through your B slit, just to open these up. The same on the other side. Now we'll want to take the brace that you attached the lacing to on the inner side. This is your left hand brace. Then you'll want to take your clamps and insert it through slit A and out through slit B and pull your brace through all the way up to the slit in your brace. You may want to dampen this area so it will be more pliable and fold to the hood more naturally. Then take your fid and run it down through that slit in the brace and through slit B and out through slit C. This is where your brace is going to follow through. Then fold your brace over. Take your clamp and pull it through. It should fit fairly snug. Pull it tight. Being damp, it will contour to the hood. Now go to the opposite side. Run your clamp through A and out through B. Take your brace and slide it through. Again, dampen this area. A drop of water goes a long ways. Pull it all the way up through to the slit in your brace. Again, running your fid through to open this up. Then I'm pulling the brace and pushing the fid at the same time. This gives you a nice tight fit with that brace. Now you want to fold that brace over and take your fid and run it through like you were going to push it through there where that slit is. This will make a mark to where you will want to punch the next to the smallest hole in your wheel punch. Center it, mark it right on that mark. This is the hole you will be pulling your opposite brace through. Now run your clamps through and pull this brace all the way through. You'll notice that hole is right at the base of your pull tab. Now insert your fid through that hole and through those slits on the underside of that brace, because this is where your alternate brace is coming through. Open that hole up. Now you want to stick your clamps through, and they should open just wide enough you can grab a hold of the tip of that other brace and pull it through. Pull it all the way through. It'll be tight, but you want to pull it all the way up until it closes. Then you can open them up and go through the other side, open it up, and pull your opposite brace through the outer side of that first brace. This will give you nice tight braces, and the back of your hood should close nice and clean. Here we are just flattening out the neck piece area around the base of the hood. This is where it was cut to an angle. Now it fits nice and flush. Now we can go on to cutting the beak hole out. You want to set your hood back on the mold. You want to be very careful when you're doing this not to allow yourself to slip. Just following that pre-cut line, cut your beak hole very carefully. Remember, if you screw up here, you throw the whole thing in the garbage. Just take a nice easy stroke, always pulling the blade down. When you get to the corners, stop. Then go back over them and cut them out with the tip of the blade. This so you have nice clean cut corners. Now you can take the hood off and insert the blade through the bottom of your beak hole and just slide it up through to the corners. Notice the angle in which the blade is at. This gives you a nice cut in the corner so you don't have overlapping. You'll want to trim this area later anyway. Then you want to cut in through the side of the hood, through the beak hole, come down to your corners, taking it easy. Now take it up over the top of the beak hole. You want to be very careful. Trimming it out, just follow the lines that you've already made. Then when you get down to the corner, it should just pop out. And there's your beak hole. Now we'll want to trim this, give it a nice beveled edge on the inside so it conforms better to your bird's face. You don't want a square corner on your beak hole. This is done simply by placing your blade at a 45-degree angle and cutting off that inner edge. And be very careful when you're cutting up around the top of the beak hole that you don't slip and cut into the hood. Take your time. We're not in a hurry here. After all this work, we don't want to ruin it. You're just trimming off that inner edge. Next, you will want to dampen the inside of the beak hole, either with a mist sprayer or with a drop of water on your finger. You just want to dampen that inner edge. You don't want it wet. This will allow you to mold it, flare it, so it fits around the bird's beak. I use my plastic rod, applying some pressure up and down and around the sides of the beak hole, and this gives a nice flare. Roll it around the base. Occasionally, to get in the smaller areas, I use a smaller wooden dowel. This also gives a nice rounded finish to the inner side of your beak hole. And here we have almost a finished hood. Next, you'll want to trim off the top. It should be dry by now. Examine the hood and see if there's any flaws. And what I usually do is close it up and see how it looks. If it's square, it's got a nice contoured finish to it. Then I give it a coat of Neat Sheen, Super Sheen. This is a spray-on additive. Gives it a nice luster finish, and here we have a finished hood. I hope this video has given you a better understanding of what goes into making a fine Dutch hood. Thank you very much.